The Blue Jewel.
Chapter 6. Part 4. Hazy memories, screams, cries, everything was shrouded in a too strange black cloud. When Arian regained consciousness, he immediately regretted doing so. He began to suffer from a headache so intense that it did not allow him to think. It seemed that his head was about to explode. It hurt so much that to relieve it she had to close her eyes. But it was useless, the pain was such that it prevented him from falling asleep again. Arian uttered a faint groan in complaint, and a figure rose from the back of the room to examine it. The figure rested its hand on Arian's head for a moment. The hand had a pleasant touch. The figure mumbled something in a whisper that seemed to him to have a tone of concern. "Vanus, come here immediately," shouted the figure, just after whispering a few more sentences that Arian did not understand. The shadow had a deep voice and a strange accent. It was a male voice. Presently the Kendali appeared, in her usual purple robe, and hurried to where the young woman lay laying. "What's the matter, my lord?" The man looked at Vanus with a serious expression. They spoke in a low tone, but Arian could hear perfectly what they were talking about. "Arian has finally woken up. I think he is in terrible pain, so take these herbs and prepare an infusion that he must drink every 4 hours." Vanus left the room to do the man's bidding, and again silence reigned in the place. Arian, in spite of his limited physical condition, tried to speak, but only a faint murmur came from it, with which he addressed the figure that stood in the gloom that reigned in that place. "Who are you?" Arian asked. The figure didn't answer, just sat up again and gently caressed Arian's face. She noticed that it was a man's hands, but his touch was soft. It reminded her of her brother's hands or loafs, so soft, so harmonious. That man must be a wizard, thought the young woman. "Are you a magician?" The figure caressed Arian's forehead affectionately again. "Don't worry, little one, we will have time for the introductions. Now rest and have the drink that Vanus offers you." And the figure returned to its lookout spot at the back of the room. Arian tried to sleep as advised by the mysterious figure, but it was unsuccessful. After a while the Kendali returned with a cup in her hand from which steam was coming out. The Kendali was quickly offered to Arian. He just had to open his mouth, but it still took him a terrible effort to swallow the infusion, but in the end he succeeded. Thanks to the concoction prepared by the Kendali he felt much better and the stabbing pain almost disappeared, so he was finally able to sleep in a restful way. The days passed slowly, Arian evolving until he felt much better. So much so that Kush decided to resume the march. Kush was another member of the mercenary company in the service of the king of Demember, as was the young man who had saved his life from the bandits. Everything that happened was the result of a risky stratagem. They knew that the bandits would not resist attacking a caravan in which the king of Demember was traveling. So they decided to ambush the bandits to finish them off once and for all and secure the southern road. What the mercenaries didn't count on was that the plan initially went so wrong and that Arian's wagon ended up destroyed in the Brown Hills. So it had to be Aris himself, who commanded all the mercenaries, who rescued her from those evil bandits. Everyone feared the worst, and given its condition it was decided not to move it and decided to set up a small camp in that place. Kush, Vanus and Agnorok and 7 other mercenaries remained. They must have had no problems as all the bandits were eliminated and the area was now safe, while the caravan continued its course south. 2 weeks had passed since the battle and Arian's recovery was a success, but although he was able to travel, he still felt some after-effects of that tragic accident. Despite their diminished condition, Kush decided to resume the march, before they decided to say goodbye to those who fell in the battle with the bandits and whose remains would rest forever in that desolate place. Kush led the group. He had the rank of captain within the mercenary company. Kush was a mage, with fine features, dark skin, brown eyes, a round skull, a thin goatee that snaked over his delicate lips. Yet he had a privileged physique, a height that rivaled Agnorok, and broad shoulders gave packaging to a maid's robe of the same light blue color as his comrades in arms. His deep, calm and serene voice, coupled with a strange accent that gave him an exotic tone when he spoke. All the other members of the group respected him, and no one disputed his orders. Even the half-orc looked comfortable under his command. The magician's gaze was reflective, but in the background there was a gleam that indicated that if the situation needed it, he could unleash the fury of a dragon. The group was small, only a dozen. Arian and Vanus were the travelers of a small wagon driven by the magician himself. She was also accompanied by Kiona. The mule had never left them since Gosberg used it many times as a mount during the journey with the caravan. Now she carried part of the mercenaries' equipment. After a week the landscape softened. Everything began to turn a little greener, some grasses growing among the rocks. It was the sign that they were approaching the pass of Lower and that they would finally leave the Deadlands behind. In the evening they set up camp under the structure of the old wagon, setting up a sort of tent and making a comforting fire at which all gathered except those who were on guard and enjoyed the Kendallese talent in the kitchen. "Is Lower's Pass far away?" Arian asked while enjoying a delicious soup made by Vanus, who, despite having hardly any raw materials, was able to surprise them with delicious dishes. "No, we'll get there in 2 days." The magician replied as he glanced through a heavy book that always accompanied him every night. "I've seen a map of Gosberg. It's always drawn with walls, but isn't it a gorge?" The magician had to look up, closed the book, lit a pipe that he used to enjoy just before going to sleep, pondered what answer to give the young woman. Yes, it was a simple gorge, until the elves built a fortress that completely occupied it. Elves? Were there elves here? The elves always excited the young girl. Kush smiled as he saw the reaction to her words. "This road we used is the old southern road. It linked the northern kingdom with the southern kingdom. Through a bridge that crossed the Strait of the Sea of Ice, of which only the wall that protects the city of Tame remains." Kush was surprised. He didn't expect Arian to have knowledge of ancient history, since almost no one cared about the ancient elven kingdoms of the First and Second eras. Yes, one of the best preserved remnants of the ancient power of the elves, perhaps next to Loas Pass. They both fell silent, Arian's thoughts turning to the elves, the first children of the gods, and that they were now isolated from the world and with less and less power. Perhaps they were destined to disappear. "How do you know that Tame's wall was part of the Great Bridge of the Elves?" Kush asked the young woman strangely. "Gosberg told me about it when I arrived in Tame." "Gosberg? Are you colleagues?" Kush smiled and then slowly smoked the tobacco from his pipe. "Indeed, he already belonged to the company before I joined. The best mercenary company in all of Shanaris." The magician smiled again. Gosberg was certainly not modest. "You are right, we are all in the service of the King of Demember right now." "Who rescued me from bandits?" "Aris, he is the one who commands this battalion of mercenaries." "If it's very young," Arian exclaimed, "the boy must be his age at most. Maturity for a half-orc is different than for men." "Another half-orc?" "The second half-orc I knew, even though they said it wasn't a common mix." "Yes, we have 2 half-orcs within the company, which is truly extraordinary." Don't be fooled by Aris' youthful looks, he's an experienced and magnificent warrior. Arian was excited, but Kush didn't seem up for the task of continuing the conversation any longer. "Is it better than Gosberg?" Kush smiled again, extinguished his pipe and withdrew the tobacco from it over the palm of his hand, got up and threw the contents over the fire, to Arian's surprise. The rest of the tobacco, when touched by the flames, transformed into a kind of light bubbles of many colors that exploded, leaving a smell of roses. "No one can be better than Gosberg," the magician replied frankly. Arian fell asleep to the smell of roses, while Kush went to check that everything was going well in the camp.